This is a powerful
We're
new
going
concept.
to revolutionize
It's
voice
really all
messages
about
where we
data
want to
collection and
change.
analysis.
We need to have an
to
active
fresh
voice.
ideas are what we
A
fresh
passive
ideas
voice
are what
won't
we
get us
really
where we
need.
want to go.
You are listening to Active Voice with your host Llewellyn King. Our guests today are Chris Guttman-McCabe and Evan O'Mahony.
Hello and welcome to Active Voice. Today we're going to take a look at communications, but a very special area of communications in the electric utility industry, how the utilities talk to themselves, how they manage the flow of information. In this age when data is king, communications are extraordinarily important. And for the program, we're very lucky to have Chris Guttman-McCabe, Chief Regulatory and Corporate Communications Officer and Head of Corporate Development at Anterix, headquartered in New Jersey, and Evan O'Mahony, Chief Information Officer at CPS Energy, headquartered in San Antonio, Texas. Welcome to the broadcast, Evan. Tell us, how long have you been in communications and how do they work in your company?
Yeah, thanks, Llewellyn. Happy to be here. So I've been with CPS Energy for a little over 6 years, 3 years as vice president of our technology organization, and 3 years as the chief information officer. As you can imagine, I think, Llewellyn, as you alluded to, communications are quite complex within, the utility environment. Maybe a couple of things I'll point out. The first is one of the most important things to our utility and any utility is the meter. The meter is what tells us as a utility how much power or gas our customers are using, whether that's residential, commercial, or industrial, but also gives us really valuable insight into what our customers are using their energy for. All of those meter communications, which for us at CPS Energy is actually almost 1.5 million meters spread across our service territory, is all dependent on a wireless communication network. We actually bring back meter data every 15 minutes from those 1.5 million meters and use that data for various purposes, operational insights, for customer billing, and all of that is enabled through a wireless communications mesh network. We also have multiple data centers and a lot that we do from a grid automation perspective, but I'm sure we'll talk more about that in our discussion here, Llewellyn.
Chris, your company has just hooked up with a private broadband network, your specialty, for CPS Energy. Tell us first, what is a private broadband network and why is it a good thing for CPS Energy to have one?
Thank you for having me on the program. I'm happy to be here with Evan. As you referenced, we just finalized a contract with CPS, with Evan and the team at CPS. So they are clearly our favorite customer. They are one of 8 utilities that we are working with to help enable and deploy private broadband networks. It's really pretty straightforward. Think of the networks that we all use in our day-to-day lives, whether we have T-Mobile, Verizon, or AT&T. The technology that is used is standardized globally. It's called LTE, and it will evolve to 5G. That is the technology that we're enabling for utilities. And so for companies like CPS Energy, what we're helping them do is really control their connectivity, really get a secure sort of pipeline to, as Evan referenced, sort of all of those wirelessly connected endpoints. I believe ultimately it will become the meters as well, but certainly sensors and devices that are throughout electric and gas grid networks and really connecting them. A lot of folks have begun to talk about this connectivity as if it's the third grid. There's a transmission grid, there's a distribution grid, and now there's a communication grid that will help utilities tie it all together.
What is the role of spectrum? Anterix has a particular holding of spectrum in the 900 megahertz band. Explain that to us, please, Chris.
Yes, certainly. Well, Llewellyn, to connect wirelessly, you actually need spectrum, right? And so Evan referenced mesh network. There are certain types of networks that use unlicensed spectrum. When you want true security and you want true control, you hopefully can secure and get access to licensed spectrum. So Anterix has licensed spectrum. We turn and make that available. It is our goal, and it's our decision to focus on the utility sector. And so we make that spectrum available to utilities like CPS so that they can build and deploy and operate these wireless networks. We have low band spectrum. It is something that we bought and took through 2 proceedings at the FCC. And now we have the authorization to turn around and offer this spectrum asset to customers. In this case, for us, it's utilities.
Evan, what will be the benefits to CPS Energy?
Yeah, well, there's a few, Llewellyn. I mentioned a mesh network that we have in place today. Currently, that network is dependent on public carriers. While we appreciate and will likely always have strategic partnerships with public carriers like an AT&T or Verizon and others of the like, what we're looking for is a solution that allows us to scale more quickly. They can enable more interoperability. As you heard Chris mention, there are more and more devices in the utility sector that require this wireless communication. By owning and operating our own wireless network, we are able to mitigate what otherwise could be some vendor lock-in in terms of deployment of these types of devices that really support that real-time grid operation. So for us, it's a real differentiator in giving us flexibility, supporting grid modernization, and allowing us to scale our network in more real time as the business warrants.
When you say scale network, what more is coming to the network that's not on it now?
Yeah, so maybe I'll hit on 2 things. The first is what we in the industry refer to as distributed energy resources. So more and more we are seeing distributed generating assets that are sitting, often referred to as behind the meter, right? So as an example, we have a residential customer that goes out in the market and buys a battery. Maybe for them, that is a resiliency service that they want to have. If they ever lose, electricity, they have capacity on the battery they can tap into. What we as a utility want to be able to do is also have access to what is sitting on that battery should the grid need that capacity. Again, that requires much more real-time interoperability with these distributed energy resources, and that has really challenged the network and giving us the capacity required to be able to do that, especially being able to execute access to those resources when the grid requires us to do so, which could be in a matter of minutes that we need to manage those real-time operations. The second example I'll mention is really just around grid automation, right? Often referred to as grid modernization. In the days years ago, you would have an outage and you would have to send your crews out and they would have to spend quite a bit of time trying to isolate the outage. Well, today we can deploy automation devices like reclosers that give us the ability to sectionalize parts of the grid or isolate where an outage may be occurring. That grid technology is another example of what uses this wireless network. So it's everything from moving data to actually controlling the grid or tapping into distributed energy resources.
Thank you. This is not your first customer in Texas, is it, Chris?
No, it's not, Llewellyn, but I do want to say before I talk about that I think I want to borrow Evan and utilize him in the discussions with our next tranche of utility customers going forward. I mean, I think he identified where we are as a sector and where we need to go. And Llewellyn, you asked about Texas. So we have 93% of the counties in Texas under contract with utilities right now. We think that is really extra special. We see some potential enhancements to what Evan discussed. We think of it as situational awareness, operational intelligence, the ability to connect but do it securely, obviously, but to connect the realities and the experiences of a range of utilities who share, sort of geographic borders and geographic areas, with Encore, with LCRA, with Excel, and now with CPS. We have four very robust operators in the state of Texas. We have another four that are spread throughout the country. Collectively, they're deploying across 15 states. So we see scale and scope benefits, but to be able to apply them in a geographically confined area like Texas, although it's a gigantic confined area, but that to me is really, it's a compelling evolution of the use of these core networks.
How, as you build out across Texas and pretty well covered Texas, how do you interface with the regional transmission operator, ERCOT, in Texas?
Yeah, some of that is going to be up to the individual utilities and how they interact. Could there be a point in time where there's connectivity and connections to the regional operators like ERCOT? Sure, there certainly could. Some of these evolutions are really going to be up to the network operators like CPS, but we do see the ability to really push intelligence outside of your substations and really push it throughout the lines gives you an awareness and then an ability to act on it that is unprecedented, right? You get to the point where you're not just reacting, you're enabling predictive maintenance. You're not just reacting, you are responding to proactively situations instead of, as Evan said, rolling a truck to figure out the hows and the wheres and the whens of an outage. And for us, I think we have about 150 companies building products for the utility sector. So the GEs and the Hitachis and Itrons and Schweitzers and Schneiders and everyone, Landis. We see an evolution coming that will be, it is designed to address the new realities that Evan and folks like Evan, who are responsible for keeping our lights on, right? We see the integration of AI, which will allow the intersection of a whole bunch of use cases to really be acted upon. Data to be captured, anonymized, then acted upon, and to do that, you need high-speed data, you need low latency data pipes, and you need ones you're not sharing with folks, Llewellyn, like you and me and Evan.
Evan, one of these things that's coming down the pike at utilities is artificial intelligence, which looks as though it could radically affect the operation of utilities. My understanding is it's now being used for predictive maintenance, for weather forecasting, but that it will gain an operational role. How will data work over the network with AI?
Yeah, I mean, data is a critical asset for us. We talk about our generation fleet and our flow of electrons and our critical infrastructure. Internally as a utility, we look at data as another element of our critical infrastructure for all the reasons, Llewellyn, that you just mentioned. One of the benefits, maybe expanding a little bit on what Chris mentioned a minute ago, of what's happening with the grid is this deployment of sensors, the deployment of 4K cameras that are giving you, real-time streaming data that can actually be showing pictures, as an example, of all the way down to a bolt that's sitting on a piece of infrastructure in a substation. So as we think about the impact of AI, and I actually think, I won't get too far on my soapbox here, I actually think that utilities have been leaders relative to the use of AI longer than most industries. And often the energy sector says, hey, we're very risk averse and we're slow to adopt. I think an exception to that, though, is really what we've done with data and AI. We have dozens of predictive models that are deployed in production at CPS Energy, looking at, hey, when we have storms coming through, where do we need to place our crews based on, the details or the profile of the storm and where historically we have seen impacts on our system. When we're looking at our underground, cables, and we're trying to predict where we need to proactively replace them to get ahead of failures that create a customer outage, we're looking at things like, soil quality, how deep are the cables, what does the sheath look like, and how should we now prioritize capital investment to replace proactively. Now think about adding all of these sensors that we're talking about to the grid. So really the challenge in the utility industry relative to AI is how do we now scale these models even faster than maybe we have in the past? And for us, that really is identifying where we can see the efficiencies come through. How do we do a proof of concept? And then how do we scale that into production so that we operationally can start to see those benefits? And of course, at the core of that, translate that to benefits for our customers through reliability improvements. But AI is only as good as the data that you feed into it. And I would argue now data is only as good as how timely it is coming into these models. And for us, the network is what gets you the data timely so you can have a built for purpose successful AI model and deployment.
Give us, Evan, some idea of the data points that are new in the industry. For example, data coming from drones, data coming from sensors in poles, data that was not available 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll use an example of vegetation management, right? That's something that every utility, is challenged with, which is how to manage vegetation that may be getting close to the lines. One of the primary reasons for outages, right? Impact could be different. You think about the West Coast, and of course the fires, and their preparedness, may look a little different than the central U.S. or the East Coast. But all of that, to your point, is done with drones, flying over. You're collecting LiDAR data that looks at, how vegetation is growing. Again, it's all about how to get the biggest bang for your buck in terms of addressing those needs as timely as possible. So, for us in the utility industry, I would argue daily, there are hundreds of thousands of new endpoints getting deployed in the utility industry in the United States on a day-by-day basis, whether it's a camera, whether it's data coming from a drone, whether it's a grid automation device, or whether it's a meter, that inherently is providing that, that connectivity. The data is going up like never before.
Llewellyn, if I may, I want to follow up because Evan stated something that we just saw. So we just came back, all of us, and I actually saw Evan there at Distributech in San Diego, and we had Anterix had an exciting event the day before the conference began with our ecosystem members. So we have 150 or so sort of technology leaders, vendors in the audience, and we did a panel with 4 of our earlier customers, and they're talking specifically about the question you raised about sort of endpoints and what are we seeing. And one utility said that they are almost finished deploying their network, and they have 4,500 endpoints right now, so meters or sensors or devices. Within the next 3 months, it'll be 9,000, and by the end of the year, it'll be 15,000 endpoints. But the most startling thing is they went down the row, and all 4 said they will have more than 1 million endpoints connected on their LTE network by 2030. That's 4 years from now. So all 4 of them said the connectivity, to Evan's point, it's growing, and what we're learning is, these forward-thinking utilities build this network, and then someone comes in and says, "Well, I've had a fault location capability sitting on the shelf for a while, and the reason we haven't deployed it is because we couldn't get connectivity to the sensors. But now that you have an LTE network, do we know if this flizzer solution has 900 connectivity. And then someone picks up the phone and calls us, and we said, yeah, absolutely. And we point them to the vendors who are doing that. And all of a sudden, you have a new use case that is being deployed. And so we're seeing and hearing about more and more of that as these networks are finally up and running, sort of this year, the end of last year, and through this year. And the future is just amazing. I think data is going to announce its preeminence in the utility world. For us, AI means always insatiable. And so you're going to have to feed that beast. I think we're going to see more what we're not calling, but what the world is calling small language models. So we're going to see more things that are confined to the operation of the grid, whether it's generation or distribution or transmission or gas. But it's going to be fueled by data, and that data is coming from a new expanded range of endpoints.
Thank you. You preempted two questions I was going to ask you, but I will plow on anyway. First one, I want you to walk us through, after you've done a deal, made an agreement with a utility, what's the next step? I mean, it doesn't come in a box from prime delivery. How is it installed? What's the build out? Give us some flavor for what happens after the signatures are dried.
Yeah, sure. Certainly. I had a big smile on my face at Distributech because Evan came to our booth, as did, a number of their employees, and they got to see firsthand. So at the Anterix booth, at the front of the booth, there were 4 utility customers, which I think is incredibly unique for the traditional Distributech booth. And they were showing what they're using it for. So Evan's team got to see, here are the different use cases. And then behind that, we had about 4 dozen different vendors showing what they are deploying on 900 megahertz. So after a contract is sold, we sort of embed ourselves, a team with the utility. We help them to the extent they need it, make decisions about who their infrastructure vendor will be. Think Nokia or Ericsson. In some cases, a utility is far along in that process, but in some cases, they're not. We help connect them to sometimes a consulting firm that can help them, begin to get a sense of where to initiate their build. And we have teams internally that help them. We actually just recently launched 2 new products that were designed to make the process easier. So one is a tower-based product, and the other one is what's called a SIM. And the goal is to make it as easy as possible for the utility to get to value, to get that network stood up, get it operational, and begin to load it with technologies. We're here for the long run. We work as much on a week-to-week basis with our first customer from 4 years ago as we will with the CPS team.
Tell us a little more about the ecosystem, which I understand is 150 or so companies in suppliers of equipment that you have somehow got into an affinity arrangement where they're competitors, but they're good pals too.
Evan and the team at CPS wasn't buying, in essence, a wireless network. I mean, they were in the end, but I think what they were buying is the underpinnings of solutions, right? And so, the upside of us connecting with a gigantic ecosystem and really building a gigantic ecosystem is the endpoints, the solutions are being developed by the GEs and the Itrons and the Landises and the Hitachis, and you could go on, Schweitzers and Schneiders, and our goal is to make their work actionable and usable on these wireless networks, so that when Evan realizes that, boy, I need to evolve my operational intelligence to include X or Y, either we already have X or Y, sort of in the cupboard ready to go, or that's a call to us to find that solution for him. And so it has been fantastic. I think we have about 3 dozen that have multiple products in the marketplace that you can buy and deploy right now. And that number grows weekly.
Thank you. Evan, in your in your operation, CPS has always been considered a seeker of new technology, innovative, questing. In your questing, what besides broadband do you see on the horizon, and how might broadband affect what it is?
Yeah, so really good question, Llewellyn, and there's certainly a ton going on from a technology perspective. We're heavily focused on a lot of our internal systems, so we're investing heavily in an ERP transformation program, and one of the primary drivers for that is so we can enable new products, services, and pricing structures for our customers. Now, on the surface, that may just sound like a back office thing that a utility needs to do, but tying it back to the network, that is really our vehicle to translate what may be happening on the grid or going back to an asset that a customer may have that we want to now incentivize that customer for giving us access to. We have to have the mechanism to actually be able to communicate with the customer in real time and translate that from a financial or from a billing perspective. And maybe that's also real time, or maybe that is, as part of their billing cycle. So as we're thinking very strategically about everything that is changing in the industry, we recognized early on that we have to have a solid core foundation from an internal technology stack perspective to be able to create these new products, programs, and services that our customers are seeking to consume that are very much informed and driven by the data that we are now able to collect. The way I like to think about it as we talk as a team, almost think about the future of our industry where every customer can participate in the market from a trading perspective, right? So now think about not only the data flow that we've been talking about, but to the systems that need to enable those types of transactions in real time, right? Those two things together create certainly tons of opportunity and excitement if you're in the technology world and in the industry, and certainly keeping us on our toes.
I like to think of communications as being soft power in a utility. And in that connection, Bill Heidemann, who used to be at DOE and is a lecturer at various universities on electricity and energy, said that he thought that communications and the use of what I call soft power in a utility could increase the flow of electricity up to 30%, which is huge, which is getting just more efficiency using AI and better communications to wring more out of the system. Do you think that's a realistic statement? And how much do you think can be wrung out of the system with AI and better communications?
Yeah, well, I don't know that I'm ready to sign up for a percentage, Llewellyn, but
I
but
thought you might not, but I would have a go anyway.
Sure. Yeah, look, I mean, the way we think about it is how can we empower our customers with information and insights so they can be more informed and make better decisions around their usage of energy, right? Today we can tell a customer, hey, here's how many kilowatt hours you consumed in your billing period. What if I can now tell a customer, up to the hour when they have appliances in their home that are drawing more energy than they were the month before? So now that customer can go make a decision about how to optimize their usage, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about. And to your point earlier about data, whether you're a commercial industrial customer or you're a residential customer, the more access to data and insights around usage and where it's coming from, and you may or may not be surprised, many of our customers don't even understand what is contributing to their consumption of energy, right? So by providing those insights and talking about conservation programs and talking about, as I mentioned, different price structures and incentives, that customers can take advantage of. It's all enabled by data. So while we can't necessarily directly change our customers' behavior, we can give them the information that they need to take those next steps. And that's how we're really positioning ourselves and see our role.
Great. Chris, the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, has just ruled, I believe, favorably for Anterix. Would you like to explain that to us and how it will benefit the utility industry?
Yeah, thanks, Llewellyn. Yes, just last week, the FCC adopted what they call a report and order. So they made a determination that we can expand our product offering from 3 megahertz by 3 megahertz to 5 megahertz by 5 megahertz. So think in the simplest terms, we were offering a 3-lane highway in each direction, and now we get to offer a 5-lane. So, it evolves into sort of a super highway. And then utilities can deploy initially, if they would like, at 3 by 3 and pivot and evolve to 5 by 5. This was a recognition on behalf of the FCC that there was a really enhanced way to make this spectrum more valuable for society. We filed a petition with the FCC with 9 other organizations, and 7 of them were utilities. So I think from the very beginning, the FCC realized that that there was a macro benefit, that there was a public interest benefit to moving forward, and clearly it's beneficial to Anterix. Clearly, it'll be beneficial to CPS and our other customers as they make a determination when and how to move forward. But this is an enhancement of that offering.
Evan, how long will your build out take? The build out to incorporate the Anterix product.
Yeah, so we're hoping to get a proof of concept, running on the spectrum that we just purchased this year. That's our goal, and then we've got a plan. I would say 18 to 24 months from there to actually build out a network. So it's a multi-year journey for us. One of the things that we were pretty diligent about in the front end that I think we're reaping the benefits of now is we tried to move from planning into execution, is we built a pretty comprehensive business case before we ever entered into the transaction with Anterix. So really understanding what are the use cases. Let's prioritize those use cases. What is the financial benefit that we expect to achieve if we go down this route? So doing a lot of that groundwork while it took some effort on the front end has actually positioned us to be able to start the build out and then scale that infrastructure, I think, a bit more timely than we would have otherwise.
Excellent. Chris, would you like to end us up with some large observation about the future?
Sure, Llewellyn, and I do want to comment. Evan's team was top notch, is top notch. I mean, he's spot on, right? They really did their homework, and I think what they found, and here's my wrap up. I think what they found was that there is absolute value in controlling your communications future, right? Wireless coverage is non-negotiable. You need coverage everywhere. Security, non-negotiable, right? The ability to control the processing and movement of your bits of data, particularly when they're attached to sort of critical use cases, it's really non-negotiable. And so what we're seeing as utilities are being asked to electrify more and more, as load growth is taking off for the first time in arguably decades, as there are more intense, more frequent, more devastating storms, more intense cyber incursions. The reality is you need to control every element of your operations. And a wireless network is arguably the core component of that.
Thank you. Evan, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, it wasn't a matter of why we needed to do this. It was a matter of when. And people ask all the time, even internally, hey, how can we do all of these things? We're going to build a new network here. We got this technology transformation. We're looking at new forms of generation. Guess what? It's not slowing down. right? And so for us, that was the reality that said, hey, we know this need exists. The need is only going to be greater over time. And so we're really excited about, bringing this into reality for our utility and translating it to some real benefits for our customers and community.
I would like to thank both of you for an extraordinary interview session. Chris Guttman-McCabe, Chief Regulatory and Corporate Communications Officer and Head of Corporate Development at Anterix, and Evan O'Mahony, Chief Information Officer at CPS Energy. You've both been tremendous. Thank you very much indeed. Cheers.